welcome to today's episode of Talk on Things and Stuff. Today is a special episode dealing with fasting and the coronavirus. As many of you know, we are in the middle of a remarkable event in human history where a significantly contagious virus has been spreading throughout the world. It's remarkable in that it is so contagious, even though a majority of people will, if they contract the virus, get sick for a period of time and recover. There's a significant enough people who will require extensive critical care in the hospital setting that because the virus is so contagious, it is very capable of overwhelming the medical system of any country that has it, even in this modern age. And so the way that we've been combating that is by following the recommendations of epidemiologists, scientists, and doctors who have pointed out that the way that we can control this is by self-isolating ourselves in an effort to reduce the rate at which this highly contagious virus spreads, so that we give our healthcare resources a chance to deal with the sickness in a much slower rate of the people who will be affected by this illness working their way through the medical system. We've received advice from epidemiologists and doctors who have tried to set our expectations. Even with all of the measures that we're taking, there's still going to be significant morbidity and mortality. But by adopting those measures, we can make a significant difference in how this will take place. Now, in the setting of all of this, we've had a couple of statements released by the current mouthpiece of God on the face of the planet Earth, and that is the prophet Russell M. Nelson. He's the head of the Mormon Church, and he released a prior statement trying to calm people and reassure people. We've covered that in a prior episode. Today, though, we are kind of looking at something that he released a couple of days ago, where he called on the world to enter into a day of fasting. And let's take a look at that message so that we can kind of see what he was trying to do there. So let me hit my share screen, and we will go to our tab and bring up the appropriate window here and take a look at this from that perspective and bring this down a little hot there. All right, let's take a look. Go full screen here.
As a physician and surgeon, I have great admiration for medical professionals, scientists, and all who are working around the clock to curb the spread of COVID-19. I am also a man of faith, and I know that during these challenging times, we can be strengthened and lifted as we call upon God and His Son, Jesus Christ, the Master Healer. I invite you to join with me in a worldwide fast, for all whose health permits, to pray for relief from the physical, emotional, and economic effects of this global pandemic. I invite members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints everywhere, along with our many friends, to fast and pray this Sunday, March 29th. Let us unite our faith to plead for physical, spiritual, and other healing throughout the entire world. The Lord understands the feelings you are experiencing. He loves and cares for you, as I do too.
All right, so let me get that out of full screen,
And
bring it back to
He
there. You can imagine that this message is probably very timely and meaningful for people who hold the prophet, President Nelson, in very high esteem and regard. It's a little bit interesting to see how he's inviting the rest of the world to join into it, because a lot of them probably don't hold the same notion that he does about the power of fasting. And we're going to listen a little bit today, or explore a little bit today, why that is. And we're going to take something that happened to me while I was a Boy Scout and use that as the comparison for it. So let's see here what I can do to okay, I think that's better. So when I was a Boy Scout, as all Boy Scouts do, we would go out to the woods and then set up camp, set up our tents, and make a fire. And in the process of doing that, the fire would create smoke. And I'm going to bring up a presentation to help me as a visual aid here, because there's something that we used to do that was really quite a lot of fun, but very revealing when we look at this. All right, so let's go to my share screen, and we're going to share our presentation. I think this will do it. Oop. There we go. All right, so we go to a campfire, and we go to a campground, we make a campfire, and there's smoke. And what happens is that if there's no wind, the smoke will generally raise vertically. But occasionally, as happens in campfires, there will be wind. So when wind blows from one direction, the smoke will go in that direction. And inevitably, just because of the way that the wind goes around, unless you have, an overwhelming gale force only in one direction, at some point the wind is going to change and the smoke is going to blow another direction. And we would go to the campfire and we'd sit down, and the smoke, would sometimes just be vertical. And then the smoke would come and just totally be in our face because the wind made it go in our face. And what did we do as scouts? Well, we had a mantra, and that is we could, if the smoke was blowing in our face, we could say, "Hate dragons, love bunnies. Hate dragons, love bunnies. Hate dragons, love bunnies." And you would say that because it had power to make the smoke go away from you. So even though if you don't say it, the wind eventually is going to shift and the smoke is going to go away. Since we knew this, then particularly with young scouts, they would come in and we'd say, "Hey, if the smoke goes in your face, you just say, 'Love dragons, hate bunnies, love dragons, hate bunnies, love dragons, hate bunnies.'" And eventually the wind would go. And it was almost like you had this power. It was a spell that you could cast. And then just to play with the younger scouts, you could say, and if the smoke isn't away from you, you can actually say, "Hate dragons, love bunnies, hate dragons, love bunnies," and the smoke would come back. But the point of it was that by casting this spell when the smoke was in your face, eventually the smoke is going to go away from your face. But you're telling people, "Hey, I'm saying love dragons, hate bunnies, love dragons, hate bunnies." And so it makes you seem like you have this special power because you cast that spell. And that is the fun that we had on campgrounds. Now, what does that have to do with actual fasting? Well, if you go and you look at the curves that happen with really any pandemic, and if you go and you look at the curves that happen with the countries that have already been hit by this pandemic, there is a very predictable pattern, and that is that the number of cases are going to increase, and then they're going to be high for a period of time, and then gradually they're going to decrease. When you look at the graph of flatten the curve that's out there, that graph is something that is very predictable. Let me see if I can bring it up here. It's predictable in that both patterns, both the flat curve and the full curve, both of those patterns include a peak and a apex. It ramps up, it hits a highest point, and then it ramps back down. And let's pull this up here. Share screen, and we'll hit this tab. Virus. All right, so here is our flatten the curve. You can see that both of these curves in both patterns, you're going to have the cases will increase, they'll hit a maximum, and then they'll decrease. And that is going to happen no matter what. and this is predictable. If we were to go back in time and map out any of the plagues, there would be an increase of cases. The disease would make its way through the population. A significant percentage of the population would have the consequences of that disease, whether it's death or disability. And then gradually the disease will pass because the people who were not affected have developed an immunity to it. And the people who were affected significantly enough to die passed away. And then you will get back to a baseline, which is established by just kind of what the disease is going to, where it's going to be inhabited, where it's going to live after the first wave of it. So this is kind of like the knowledge that the wind is going to blow one way and then the wind is going to blow the other way. It's just one of those things that is the reality of the situation. I think when you don't keep that in perspective and all you've heard are doomsday scenarios from an apocalyptic group that has this mythology about disasters, earthquakes, plagues, disease, locusts, everything leading up to a great calamitous event where, much like you'll see in the pages of the Book of Mormon, when Christ returns, he returns with a great deal of destruction. Cities are destroyed, entire populations, men, women, and children are all killed in that destruction. And Christ returns, this is in 3rd Nephi chapters 8 and 9. Christ returns comes to the Americas at that time and says that all of those people were destroyed because of their iniquity. And that is the same paradigm that the church has espoused for what is going to happen at the second coming. And so people who only look at these world events as these great tragic things may have that fear that that's what this is leading up to, when if you look at the pattern of human history and disease, this type of epidemiological curve is what goes through populations when viruses that have this particular contagious profile happen. Now, those two curves exist as models because we have scientists, doctors, epidemiologists who, understanding the nature of a virus and how it spreads and how it can overwhelm our healthcare systems, are able to model how we can change the rate of the spread, and so the rate of the demand on our healthcare resources, and that's why you see the two different curves. So it's through science, through an understanding of our world, through examination of objective data and modeling based on objective data, that we are able to feel like we have some measure of power over how to reduce the negative impact of this disease. And this is very different from what is happening in President Nelson's address. I think if we were to look at some of the things that he says, he starts out and I think it's good to give him credit with an acknowledgement of the importance of our healthcare workers, of the doctors on the front line. These is going to be your emergency room physicians, your critical care doctors, those people who are putting themselves at risk to take care of the patients who are the most severely affected by this virus. We've seen in other countries, such as Italy, that the healthcare systems have been so overwhelmed that they've had to convert entire floors of hospitals into critical care units. There haven't been enough of the sorts of breathing, life-saving machines that are available for the patients most severely hurt by this disease. And so in some cases, they've had to resort to a form of triage, which looks at saving younger people over the sicker, older people, which is the opposite of the normal allocation of healthcare resources. But because they are now having to choose between saving years of life rather than simply saving lives, that's what they had to do. We're starting to see stories now in America's hottest hit part of this disease, which is in New York, where their emergency paramedic systems are overwhelmed and where hospitals are starting to see the same types of concerns and issues that we saw in other countries. So this is why America is getting much more serious about following the recommendations of epidemiologists and doctors and scientists who understand this disease in terms of its contagion and are making recommendations for that have nothing to do with fasting. But since the prophet has said we're going to fast and we're going to invite everybody to fast, then all we need to do is just fast forward now several weeks to months in the future. Regardless of whether or not anyone fasted, that peak is going to be a hit, and then it's going to start to wane. We're going to start to see a decrease in the number of cases. Hospitals may get overwhelmed with, their ICUs completely slammed, but then after a period of time when people either pass away or get better, it's going to gradually reduce. And the prophet then is going to be able to say, because of our fasting, we have recovered from this disease. And what that's going to have the effect of is the people who believe in this power of fasting are going to say, this is more proof that the prophet is the mouthpiece of God, the gospel is true, and I need to keep paying tithing and keep devoting hours and aspects of my life to the things that these men say. Just like with the younger scouts, when they come on their first camp out, and the older scouts say, look, I said, hey, dragons love bunnies, and the smoke went away. Even though we know that it's going to happen anyway, that's how it happens. So I'm going to do a couple of things here. I want to get your comments on it. There's a few additional posts that I want to bring into this, but because I was trying to rushing to get this graphic out and everything, I didn't get a chance to pull those up. So I am going to do a couple of things here. We're going to go ahead and open up the phone lines so that if anyone is interested in joining us by phone, they can. Let me go ahead and get that up. The number is 210-422-2222. If you've had family members or other people come and kind of give you the same sort of notion, then share that with us. Let us know how it affected you and what you're hearing from your family members. If you call, we should be able to get that up. I'll stop the screen here, and while we're waiting for any calls, let's take a look and see what comments we have. Okay, Anna B says, the power of fasting is better than the power of the priesthood. Yes, in this instance, it may work, so the virus doesn't spread to priesthood holsters. And this is something that's oddly alluded to in President Nelson's address. He talks about Christ being the master physician, and he kind of shakes his head a little bit there, and it's a little rhetorical flourish when he does that. But that calls back to the fact that when the church was first formed, one of the things that the prophets and apostles did as they traveled as missionaries of the church was claim to be able to heal people. And you can go back and look at the newspapers from the 1830s, and there are a handful of stories of the brethren sharing the gospel, claiming to be able to heal people and doing their blessings to heal people, but then those individuals subsequently died. Not only that, but we have more recent stories now where the apostles are protecting themselves from that. Elder Bednar, in particular, has gone so far as to make the case that when he gives a blessing of healing to somebody who is sick, who asks him for it, he may on occasion ask them if they have the faith not to be healed. And I think that's just an acknowledgement that the priesthood blessings have zero power in terms of actually affecting disease. And ironically, in the era of the COVID-19 coronavirus, having the exposure of a priesthood holder go to your house, place his hands on your head, may actually increase the spread of disease. And because people carry this virus and are asymptomatic or minimally symptomatic, and are able to give it to other people who can then carry it to people who are very vulnerable, older people, people with lung problems. And so, it's paradoxical that priesthood blessings would have anything to do with healing, because they actually make the scenario worse for the community as a whole. All right, so let's see if I can bring up some other things. Let's see. Oh my goodness. So there's a parody account of Russell M. Nelson. You should know I chose fasting as a solution to this problem so poor people could do something to, quote, help in the fight against this troubling disease that God so graciously sent us as both a test and a punishment. And this kind of just alludes to the paradigm where, because there's this frame that the church can manipulate a scenario to support its narrative no matter what happens, then when a disease comes, you can frame it as both a blessing or a curse. If it comes to California, to San Francisco, you could say, well, this is a curse for the iniquity of those lands. And this is things that were actually said by the brethren around the HIV/AIDS epidemic, was that they were receiving the consequences of their iniquity. But when it happens in Utah, then they can say this is a test of our faith, or these are expected tribulations that come in the days leading up to the return of Christ. And so we will exercise faith by holding on to the gospel in the face of those challenges. And it's just a really remarkable thing. All right, so let's see here. Any other comments? Okay, so Ali Von C mentions that the first person that died in Utah was a male temple worker. And this again just returns to the fact that following the brethren, doing the work that the church espouses people to do in order to gain salvation, doesn't necessarily guarantee healing and can actually make things worse with a disease like COVID-19. And that is because you have a vulnerable population, which are the elderly temple workers, who are coming into close physical contact with people through the exercise of the endowment ceremony. And they themselves may be ill and give it to other people, or they may contract it from someone who carries the virus but does not feel symptomatic and give it to them. And in fact, that did happen in Utah temples early on. In responding to this pandemic, the church continued to allow temples to be open for people to interact in those close handshake, arm on shoulder ways that are part of the temple ceremony. And it took them a little bit of time to understand that that was not going to be protective. People were not protected from disease, even though they were doing endowment ceremonies, and so they had to stop it and close down temples. Okay, so let me see here. I want to bring in something posted by Simon Southerton that I think we can bring up here. This looks like a great resource for it. So let's hit share screen and we will bring this examination. Remember I told you that you can look at, oh, don't do this to me, come on. Whatever, okay. Please let me in, just whatever, all right. Okay, so remember I said that we can look at how past pandemics have hit the world, and we can learn from that and understand that it is a predictable phenomenon. Well, there's an article that National Geographic released which looks at how the Spanish flu of 1918 hit various different cities, and they have some really great graphs where you can see in Philadelphia, where the cases increased, hit a peak, and then left. You can say examples in San Francisco, it peaked, went back down, but then after they relaxed social distancing measures, there was a second wave. And again, this is something that is, somebody who has a narrative about the end times could say that, we were good, but then we started disobeying God, and so he brought back the plague. Or you could just understand how contagions work, how social distancing is effective, and then if you immediately stop it before the disease has gotten low enough in prevalence, then you're going to see a second peak. This is just where science and understanding, rationality and reason prevail over dogma and claimed divine sanction and divine power. So this is just examples of how the various cities that responded in different ways were affected differently. And all of this data and what we learn from this data is what informs us as to how we can best respond to this. All right, so let me get that back off. Again, if you want to join the conversation, 210-422-2222. Let's see here. There is another post that was quite good that I want to make sure that I bring here. And this post was originally from Simon Southerton, and it was made public now. Simon Southerton is a scientist who works in the field of genetics. His primary focus is on, I believe, plant and tree genetics, but with that comes an understanding of basic science behind the sorts of diseases and the way things spread. All of that is part of the training as you become a biologist and a scientist. And on top of that, it informs you as to how you can relate to the expertise of the people who make that their primary focus. And his comment was one that kind of got me thinking about the parable of the dragons and the bunnies and how you can contextualize how different people claiming some special divine or magical power can exploit the thing that we're all going through in a way that would seem to give them more power. So let's bring up Southerton's comment here, see if I can bring it. Chrome tab. All right, so I'll see if I can make the text bigger. Oop. Okay, so from the mind of Simon Southerton comes this observation. As many of you well know, President Nelson has called for a global fast to help in the fight against the coronavirus pandemic. It is a very well-timed call because the scientific data is telling us that in the next week or two, rates of infection will begin slowing in many countries, including the United States. Let me just make this full screen so that we can see it better. This will be entirely due to the science-led introduction of social distancing rules. But get ready to hear Mormons claiming it happened because they skipped 2 meals. He's talking about the fasting effort that's underway now. I cycle every other day at a safe distance with a math teacher. I'm going to go ahead and pause that for now. I cycle every other day with a math teacher. I'm allergic to math, LOL. He's been plotting a curve on the case growth data for each country and using the curve to predict when cases will peak. A few weeks ago, before social distancing began in earnest, these curves looked very grim. It was looking like many millions of Americans would get infected in the next month, resulting in the hospital systems being totally overwhelmed. Just a week ago, the peak was looking like 500,000. If he just uses the growth data for the last 3 days, it's looking closer to 200 to 250,000 for the U.S. This does not mean in a couple of weeks we go back to normal life. It hopefully means the hospital system may be spared being utterly overwhelmed and many people dying from other causes. This same slowdown can be seen in many countries. We will almost certainly see a flattening of the curve in new cases in the next week or two. The death curve will flatten out in a week or two later. To keep it low, we will need to keep isolating, but we could probably start to see some restrictions being lifted. Let's not forget who really helped the world avoid a major catastrophe here. The flattening of the curve that we will soon see is due to honest, hardworking scientists in a wide range of fields. It will not be due to a sadistic being who allowed the pandemic to kick off and then jumped in at the last minute to save us. And his last comment there is just reflecting the concern that a lot of people have when they hear religionists talk about praying to God to save us from a pandemic that they would say was sent to the earth by God as a struggle or a challenge. All right, so we've got a call. Let me see if I can shift to that, and we'll bring it in. Hello, you're on Talk on Things and Stuff, but I've got to change the screen setting. Give me just a second. Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, okay, hold on just a second. I'll recognize your voice. Okay, so let me make sure that we're there so no phone numbers are showing. And
hey, Al, could you close the door, babe?
Okay, there we go. All right, you're on Talk on Things and Stuff.
John Streeter, you magnificent bastard. Very interesting episode. Thank you for doing it. I am enjoying it, sir.
What's on your mind?
Well, I want to go back to at the beginning when you started. I did happen to catch it. I want to know who President Nelson's PR team is. Who is working it? Because his messages, did you notice the way it just wasn't, he had the soft look. I know he tries to do the grandfatherly thing, but it was a very soft look. He's got this compassion look worked out.
Oh yeah.
The lighting, something's a little different. Somebody's been working with him, and that's what I.
Particularly like at the end, it's so interesting because he talks about God loves you, and then there's like this subtle pause, and then this kindly smile and a soft voice, and I love you too, and it's just one of those things where he's saying he loves everybody, and it's kind of like, well, if you're saying you love everybody, then what you're saying is essentially your love is meaningless because there's no selectivity in that, and it doesn't really mean anything. It's nice that you feel good if love for everybody, but other than just trying to get me to accept whatever you say because now you love me, so whatever you say must mean it's for my benefit, and whether or not it actually means that is, a totally different issue.
John, I got a question. Now, correct me if I'm mistaken. Did he not invite other faiths, other religions to also join?
Yeah, he did.
Okay, does that take some balls? I mean, let's give him some points for balls. Seriously, that is that peacocking, positioning? What are we doing here? Something's going on. Because how many memes have you seen of President Nelson next to Montgomery Burns, going to excellent, because he looks like that. Or the evil emperor from Star Wars. Yeah, it kind of looks like that too, Yeah. But now he's soft, grandfatherly looking and all this. So I think, positioning, trying to reach out to the world.
The other thing you'll notice in terms of PR and messaging is that in both this message and the one before, he has an image of a statue of Christ in the background. And so it's just a subtle cue that's telling you that he is representing Christ in giving you this message. And that is how the prophets frame themselves. When the new prophet gets called, they'll have usually a junior apostle or a medium apostle give a talk in conference about how we are so blessed to have a mouthpiece of God, someone who will give us the mind, the will, and the voice of God. And it's there. It's very clear. It's just ironic that it's the same statue that he gave the Pope, and the same statue that the brethren seem to hand out to any other world leader that they give is this little 12, 18-inch Christus statue. Check it out.
Yeah, I did not notice. That is a good catch. See, that's why you get the big bucks, John. That's why. Can I make a suggestion?
Yeah, please do.
I'm sorry. No. You mentioned Bednar earlier, and when I watch videos, it just kind of springboards in my mind. It's like, oh, I wish he would do a video on this and this and this. I need to write it down, send it to you, and at least I tried. But the way, what is Bednar? What I would call it is he is the king of sidestepping and bullshitting. Oh boy, Ben. You can't ask him a question without him. I don't know what's the right term. Reframing the whole thing, changing the whole paradigm around. It's just, oh, Bednar, you are a master of bullshit and sidestepping. That's the way we would say it down south. I swear to God, that's what it does. You're the perfect guy to show little clips from that and tie it together in your wonderful way. So
yeah, he definitely has a way about him. But I think Nelson really is shining right now. How he's really figured out how to capitalize on the soft, gentle, grandfatherly approach to things is very different from like if somebody like Bednar was put in this position or Oakes. I don't know if they could capture that, but it's a little bit weird because when you go back in time and look at President Nelson's earlier talks when he was a younger apostle, you see very much more the strict, rigid, dictatorial surgeon paradigm. There was a video I released recently that is a clip of some of these manipulative segments from past talks of the leaders, and including a couple from President Nelson, where he's just like, the people who reject the words of the prophet need do so at their own peril, because the scriptures say if they don't follow the prophet, they will be destroyed in this land. It's just like, and the way he delivers it is very straightforward, harsh. I'm giving you the harsh truth reality, and you have to accept it. It's very different from what we're seeing here as the gentle, grandfatherly type of person.
Absolutely. That was the one on the television screen, right? With the tied in with the movie, right?
Yeah, exactly. With the Get Out thing.
Hey, that was a really good video, by the way. I love
Thanks.
that a lot. Yeah, absolutely. And here, John, let me go back to it, John. I mean, seriously, let's brainstorm this real quick. Who would be the guy or the group to help him make that softer image happen, like we've been seeing? Is it like Brother Jones, from the camera crew, who's going, we need to change the lighting around, and then maybe somebody showed him one of those memes. Look, they're comparing you to this guy here. You don't want to be him. You need to soften it up, Prez. Come on, what are we going to do? Who would be the actual people or person that would help him with that? Who do you think? I'm really curious.
Well, I think it would actually be the PR department. I think they're the ones that are responsible for these videos coming out. And, anytime you have a PR department, you have a brand, you have a way that your image is projected in a way that you want it to be projected. And so, absolutely. I mean, I think that they've likely hired people who already have a track record of being able to frame things in that way. When we want it to be soft, when we want it to touch your heart, then we do things in a particular way. And when we want it to be somber, when we want it to reflect not only the gravity of the situation, but also the calm, measured assurance of the prophet, and to convey both comfort and security, I think they know very much how to do that. Just like any good advertising company is able to very predictably design the type of emotional response that a commercial would evoke. That's the same sort of thing here. The church, as you probably know, once upon a time had this trademark technique called heart cell, which was a way of framing video with music, with pacing that would convey emotion. Yeah, and so
series. Yeah.
And so you could, it was very much was a product that somebody could purchase and employ, or that somebody could learn and employ. And the people who are there in the church now absolutely do that. I think, there's no question about that. In terms of who it is, it's just people in the church PR department.
you okay, hey, I got to know this. Your vote, yes or no? It's yes or no, okay? Mm. Did President Nelson practice that soft look in the mirror?
Oh.
Yes or no? My yes. What is your vote? John, come on.
I think that by now he has given so many talks. He's talked in so many different ways. I don't think it's even an intentional, nefarious thing like, oh, now I'm going to give him, that soft grandfatherly look. It's like, the soft, gentle blue steel. I think it's just one of those things that when people talk, they can feel the power of how they talk, and it includes the pacing, where they pause, very much like President Eyring or President Holland, where they start to let their voice quiver a little bit so it sounds like they're having to talk through almost crying. All those things are learned vocal, rhetorical devices that just become a natural part of somebody's presentation. And I wouldn't be surprised if the way he has learned it is just that he interprets that as when he's feeling the Spirit, that is how he talks. And so, I don't know. I think he may have just gotten feedback from people in terms of how this is going to convey. And certainly if he came across being outside of a very useful framework, somebody in the PR department would say, okay, that was good. Let's try it again now with a gentle tone. Let's pretend that you're the grandfather who's in the room and you've got a sick family in front of you and you're trying to give them comfort, and action. And so I think, he would very much respond to that. So there are handlers there, but I don't know how much work they would actually have to do, because I think it comes natural to these brethren after they talk so frequently.
John, I think you're absolutely on point. I swear I can really see that happening. I can. Hey, one last thing I wanted to throw out there, if you don't mind. Just think about it. Next weekend is conference. Any little conference predictions, or maybe think about it. A little video out there. I would love to hear some conference predictions.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm no good at that. I think that I don't know. I've got the Mormon brethren are so sophisticated in that they know how to make statements that are so ambiguous that the people who are faithful will interpret them as prophecies, and then whatever happens, they'll frame it like that. And then outsiders will see those statements and they'll be like, well, that's just a nice sentiment. And so I don't expect them to say, like, by next year we will have gathered in Adam on Amen, and we will be receiving Christ in all his glory. We will know it's him because he's coming in a red robe. Which is weird because I think he actually said that in the upcoming Ensign. There's like an article that talks about what the church believes about the second coming. And that's one of the little data points that's there, is he's going to come adorned in red. He's going to be dressed in red. I don't know.
Can I? You just triggered. You just made me think of something. I'd like to share this with you if you don't mind, because I don't think you've heard this before. Maybe you have. And if you have, please enlighten me. I have a friend, a TBM friend, who I'm close with. A guy, go to lunch. He's great, nice guy. He's telling me that a friend of his brother-in-law or whatever, they've got a special mission that just isn't talked about publicly, and that is going to prepare the area of Adam Diamond for the great final council and all this. So, and I don't know how credible it is, but it was one of those stories, and there's one that was new to me. It was only a couple of years. It was only a handful of years ago that I heard this. Mm-hmm. I'm like, you've got to be kidding. And so I wonder if there are people on certain kind of peculiar, strange little missions like this, and it wouldn't surprise me, but it's just fascinating. So oh boy, you believe it heart and soul, don't you? When you believe it, you believe it.
Yeah.
Oh my God. There.
I mean, we already know that they have people on secret missions, or what outsiders would see as secret missions. When you talk about the Strengthening the Church Committee, where there are people who intentionally monitor the online activities of critics and dissidents in the church, and report those facts back to the brethren who sit in council to monitor these things, that is, something that I think any outsider would say that's a weird thing for a church to do. But it's there. It's actually part of the church's organization. So I don't know.
I've seen posts like that, and they ask these questions. It's like, are you like, compiling a report or writing a book? What are you doing here? and it's like, it's very, very pointed questions, and people answer, and everything. It's interesting. I believe I've seen that in action. Yeah. But anyway, I'll let you go and give somebody else a chance. Thank you so much. Enjoy it and keep up the good work, John.
All right. Thanks for your call. Well. All right. Stay safe. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay. So while we wait for our next call, there is, in addition to Simon Southerton's excellent post reminding people that when it's all said and done, it's going to be because of the efforts and recommendations and work of scientists and doctors, nurses, healthcare providers, on top of the logistical and consumable-based supply chain and grocery store providers and restaurateurs, all those people who have helped us stay in isolation during this time. That is going to be the real force of power and healing and recovery from this disease. There was one more comment that was sent to me. It was sent by somebody who's not able to share it publicly, but is really powerful and effective. So I wanted to bring that in. I'm going to stop screen here, and we will share actually, let me hit present on this so it's full screen, and we will share a Chrome tab presentation, share. All right. So this is the message. Dear friends and family, I know you're all hungry this morning for a reason. I respect your unity and efforts in this trying time. But please, don't claim credit when the vaccine is discovered. Scientists were working on it before your fasting and prayers were even a notion in a general authority's mind. As deaths increase over the next weeks, don't be so crude as to think your skipping a meal prevented deaths. Flattening the curve came from science, not faith. We are poised to watch a lot of Americans and humans worldwide die for weeks, regardless of faith, gender, and nationality. Those who heeded the warnings of scientists and healthcare workers made the difference in death rates. While loved ones and friends mourn those who suffered from a global pandemic, please keep your faith quiet. Again, living your faith is admirable, but boasting that your actions had a global impact is hubris and pride. You're free to have your faith, but please respect that science and medicine made all the difference. and let the nurses, doctors, researchers, orderlies, and others who worked on the front lines making tough decisions and risking their own lives claim credit for seeing us through the pandemic. I thought that was a really powerful statement there. All right. So let's get our phone lines up again. If you would like to join the conversation, the phone number is 210-422-2222. Let me make sure I'm all set for that. And we can go to this, share screen, share audio, home tab, voice. Hello, you're on Talk on Things and Stuff.
Hello, greetings, Jonathan. My name is Serge.
Hey, Serge.
Like a power surge, that's right.
Yes. What's on your mind?
So I've just got to say that what you're talking about today was a huge part of the realization that led to my faith transition. Yeah, this realization that I had a different standard for the church and the miracles and the things we did on Sunday had a different standard for those than I did throughout the rest of the week. So I'm a college professor, and so much of the thinking that we would do at church, I would fail my students. They would not pass their assignments if they were applying the same logic and reasoning. So for example, with priesthood blessings. So when you give a priesthood blessing, then no matter what the outcome was, the result would be increased faith. So if the person recovered, they were healed, then, that was great. That clearly, that's the power of the priesthood that brought that change about. But if they didn't get better, well, they had something to learn. It was a test, but God was pleased with our efforts to exercise faith.
Yeah.
And so no matter what, when I would pray or read scriptures or anything that had a measurable outcome, the only possible thing that could come out of it was increased faith. And because I'd stacked things in my paradigm in that way, there was no
What
way
woke
that
you up?
evidence.
What woke you up to make you say, wait a second, I can't hold these two different standards of rationality in my head if I'm going to be true to, my own mental faculties?
Well, I think my wife was starting to have a little bit of a faith crisis, and that was enough to get me to examine those things. But certainly as a missionary, I'd encountered that. I'd bear testimony that they needed to read the Book of Mormon and they'd learn it. And if they didn't get that witness, well, they just hadn't put in enough effort. But I clearly didn't do the same thing with the Quran, for example. I haven't put any time or effort into gaining a testimony of it. But my standards were pointed in one direction with very, very blind spots behind me.
That brings up a really good thing that comes to mind anytime you're talking with someone. I think particularly people in a faith crisis, when, usually, I say usually, but it's very common for a handler to, come in. It may be the bishop, it may be your home teacher, maybe your elders quorum president, somebody come and talk to you about it. And one of the things that almost invariably comes up at some point is, well, have you really studied the Book of Mormon? Have you really given it the chance, really, really with great intent, wanting it to be true? And it's like, well, have you studied the Bhagavad Gita? Have you studied the Quran? Have you studied any other religious text of any other thing to know if it's true or not? And they'll be like, well, no, I don't have to do that. I already have the truth. And it's a double standard. Absolutely.
Yep. And I am just shocked looking back at what a blind spot I had, and just how my entire testimony, as well as I think most that I know, have that same bias just built in, and it doesn't work when you actually try to apply the same standards of logic and reasoning that you do throughout the rest of the week in your daily life. And that's whether you're a truck driver or a scientist. We all function based off of a different paradigm outside of faith, and it's hard to justify why faith would be that different.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think what's happening now is different from some of those other double standard things, because we could realize a double standard where some other religion does something terrible and we're like, oh, that's horrible. But then when the prophet does something like that, we create excuses for it. That's one type of double standard. But then there's this other type of double standard that's harder to see, and that is when the church does something that, in this case, is going to be a positive thing. Everybody's going to fast. At some point in the future, the disease will start to get better. And if you're not thinking that extra layer of examining, the whole logical framework behind what is going on, then it's going to be very easy for you to have this sequence of events build your belief and build your faith in the church, and so bind you closer to feeling like your life has to conform to the impositions of the church. Because it's going to get better, and I'm going to already have that seed planted in my head that it's because of the prophet's recommendation, because of my own devotion and fidelity of obeying the prophet, going through the fasting. He didn't talk about it because he's giving a message to everyone in the world, but you're not really fasting in the church unless you're taking the money that you would have spent from that fast and giving it to the church. So that's a subtext that's not there, but you as a believer will have done that, because that's the only way to actually do a true fast. And so you're going to find more faith in the church in a way that's not as obvious as like excusing some other religion for doing something heinous, whereas you would, or not excusing them and then excusing the brethren.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. So I also have a general conference prediction, since that was brought up before.
What's that?
Yeah. So, more of the same. There will be more Nephi, less Wi-Fi. So get off the darn internet. Quit looking at websites. Quit listening to podcasts. Satan wants to lead you astray, and that's how he'll do it. I'm sure they'll make an enemy. If we've got these nefarious people who have become dissatisfied with the church, who want to lead you astray, I think that rhetoric will be there in full force, and somehow there will be crazy amounts of irony as they talk about Joseph Smith and his willingness to answer questions, while at the same time saying, don't you dare ask any questions that don't align with the brethren. So that's my prediction.
I am in agreement with you on that one. More of the same, and it's the same banal stuff. I think they may feel a little bit emboldened in talking about how the home-centered church has really allowed us to weather these difficult times in a way that keeps us close to our faith. They're going to be able to say that. And not only that, they may be able to say, even in the future, if schools were to completely shut down, we've got the infrastructure through the BYU remote education plan to handle, even from grade school all the way up until college. Because when they implemented that plan, if you go back and you listen to the addresses being given by the people in charge of that program, they said we are geared up to be able to provide high school, grade school, all the way through college through this remote learning system. So they're going to be able to talk about those things in a way that will definitely further increase faith and further increase the notion that they had, God on their side in preparing for these things.
Sure, that's the whole reason God allowed the internet to be discovered and invented.
Yeah, very true. Well, listen, thanks. It's always fascinating to hear from people who come from the world of academia, from professors and people, because I kind of was in the same boat, having gone through college and through med school and everything, and then realizing that I was not using the same standards of logic and rationality in my approach to the claims of the church that I was using in my perspective, in my work, and in my study. So definitely appreciate that aspect of your experience.
Yeah, no, thank you. I really appreciate your show. Take care.
All right, you too. Take care.
Bye.
Bye. Okay, so let's see here. What do we have in comments? Oh my God. Mike Norton, this is live, but is it interactive? Is Jonathan a cam girl now? This virus has really made some people do desperate things. So sad. I'm not even going to comment. I have the best show. Everybody says it's the best. Everybody else's show is loser. All right, so Cookie Pierce says, I'm way more interested in General Conference now that I'm no longer LDS. This is so true for me too. I used to sleep through General Conference like a mother. It was just terrible. But now I'm just intensely fascinated by, like, is Irene going to make it through his talk without crying? No, he never does. And, what sort of seemingly banal or soft, nice message are they going to give that is actually absolutely spiritually toxic and psychologically damaging, because it seems to happen every single time. And it's just, the only difference is that you just realize that these men are speaking from pride and hubris rather than from legitimate authority, and it's ridiculous. All right, so phone line is open if you would like to call and join the discussion. We are talking about the recent invitation that the prophet made to the world to join in a day of fasting. The idea that his invitation is going to make a difference is definitely going to be held by the people who follow the prophet and see him as an inspired mouthpiece of God, because the disease will get better. If you just fast forward a month, a year from now, the number of cases will have decreased. Medical professionals will be more experienced in how to respond to the cases when they show up again. New therapies in the form of vaccines or other medications that help reduce the morbidity and mortality of this disease will have been discovered or developed. And the world is going to be very different from when it was blindsided by this pandemic at this particular moment in time. And people are going to be able to frame that as, well, our prayers and our fasting was answered because of this. Much like in the very beginning of this video, where we looked at the difference between the smoke going away or towards the person by the campfire, and all they have to say is, love dragons, hate bunnies, and the smoke will go away. So certainly, I know when I had kids and we first were sitting around a campfire, I absolutely did that. And they're like, ooh, wow, Dad has power. But, later on they catch on, just like all of us do, just like anyone does. Just imagine if some religious leader back in the pandemic of 1918 said, do such and such and such and such, and you'll get, and the disease will be taken from the earth. And it doesn't matter how long it takes. Eventually the disease will go back to its baseline, and they'll be able to claim proof that they did it, and the proof is there. All right. Okay, so let's see here. Hold on. All right, so we've got a comment from Me Too. Mr. Russell M. Nelson, why didn't you forewarn Americans of this oncoming virus so that we can avoid all of this? And this is it's another one of those, you're talking now after the fact. The members of the church are only going to connect the dots of events in ways that will promote their faith and their belief in the church and in the prophet. So when they see, wait a second, church was only 2 hours and we were already asked to do a little bit at home, well, that means that the prophet was preparing us for this time when, we'd all have to be cloistered at home. There's a manual where everybody's learning the same thing, no matter where they are, at home or at church. This is all inspired direction, and they're going to piece that together, and it's going to be faith promoting. And they're not even going to consider the data point of, well, the prophet made some statement that was, just some bread and butter lame thing at a time when he could have used that airtime or that, those particular centimeters of press on the pages of the Deseret News to say, we all need to make sure that we've, bought an excess of P99, P95 gas and other personal protective equipment for our healthcare providers, and all those different things. They're not going to connect that dot, and they're not going to connect the dot of, wait a second, he didn't say that when we return missionaries from other countries that have a high prevalence of the disease, we should be wise in how we do it and have them be in quarantine in some of our empty ward buildings for a period of 2 weeks, so that anyone who develops symptoms who was at the start of that time an asymptomatic carrier can be further isolated, and then only after that quarantine period allow missionaries who have no symptoms to then join with their families in a way that maintains the social distancing. The prophet, if he had done that, that might even have been a point in support of his prophetic vision. But in reality, it would have just been that he was at least adopting common sense measures based on the recommendations of healthcare professionals and epidemiologists anyway. So, I was fasting that you would read my comment. Well, it's good to hear that you can now eat, but it's not really a fast unless you send me the money. So I don't know what you're talking about. Well, send the money to somewhere. I don't want your money. All right. So let's see. If anyone wants to join the conversation, the phone number is 210-422-2222. There was one other graphic that I wanted to find. There was a cartoon that I don't think I'm going to be able to find it, but it involved the heads of a number of different religions, all huddled around a scientist physician working at a microscope, and they were all encouraging him, the doctor, to work faster. And it just reflects the notion that the measure of healing from the disease is going to come through the efforts of scientists and doctors who are not using religious dogma to guide them, but rather using the tools of science to do that. And I think that's something where you could even approach this issue from a faithful perspective. For example, President Nelson. He could have directed that everybody in the church fast to support the efforts of the many scientific and healthcare professionals who are actually focusing their resources on this right now, that their work will be supported by God. But it's more nebulous for him to just generally say, so that the relief of all of the impact of this disease will be seen. It's a lot easier to claim victory in that regard. Okay. Well, let's see. I think that may be it. We're hitting just at the hour point right now. I don't really have much else prepared. I think when I'm trying to balance, just stuff that I have going on here with doing these videos. And I originally wanted to start out with looking at some other religion that claimed to take part in healing. You can look at the Church of Christ Scientists, and their whole perspective on our world is that all disease is really in your mind, and it's the result of being somehow disconnected from God through your own failings. And so they are then able to frame any measure of healing as the result of their particular religious activities. And the opposite side of that coin is that when you are sick, it says something about your spiritual state. And that creates a culture where people tend to hide, conceal, or deny their own illness. And, that is its own issue, that when you talk to people who have left that particular church, they have, I think, very harsh response to religionists who interfere with healthcare system and the notion of medicine on faith basis, because it's interjecting in a place where they really just have no business being. Because it's when you start having these dogmatic ideas interfere with the scientific process that is behind evidence-based medicine that you start wasting resources, doing damage in instances where you should not. I mean, we're seeing this even outside the realm of faith. We saw some examples of the recommendation that a particular type or combination of medicines that were actually antibiotics or anti-malarials could, completely, eradicate this disease if people started taking them early on. And this was something that got so much press that even the president tweeted about it. And there is a famous press conference now where the president mentions that, and then an actual scientist, Dr. Fauci, has to go up afterwards and say that's an anecdotal bit of data. We don't have any evidence, and we're trying to guide all of our reactions by something that meets the standard of medical care and evidence. And people subsequently have done some research into the first study that showed that data that gave people this idea. And it turns out that the selection of the patients was poor. They appear to have intentionally left out certain data points by excluding patients. And on top of that, the primary researcher is somebody who has a track record of fabricating data. And so all of those things need to be paid attention to, because if you're following dogma and not actually being critical about what you're doing, then you're not actually doing any good. And there is a dogma to science in terms of if something is published, then it's gone through a certain degree of peer review, and so you should be able to believe it. Well, science, that's not actually a concept of science. The notion that you need to remain skeptical and critical is what is in that. You have to go back and examine the data, because there's no guarantee that a particular peer review process is actually adequate. And this is why when you talk to people who are trained in medicine, when you talk to scientists or other people who do rely on peer-reviewed academic literature, in their training, they're not simply told you read a journal and accept it as gospel fact. What they are done in the course of their training is they are taught about statistics, they are taught about study design, they're taught about how to interpret what is written in a journal and how to critically analyze it so that you can pick up on deficiencies and faults and problematic areas of study design, problematic conclusions, because your job as a physician, as an academic scientist, is to always be critical and skeptical of things and make sure that there is data and evidence to back it up. And so that's kind of what we're given a chance to do by taking this very reserved, measured approach that we're seeing modeled by Dr. Fauci on early claims of miracle cures, which this combination of drugs seemed to be. It doesn't mean that you don't explore it, but you have to make sure that your rationale for going down that road is on sound basis, because you're going to be devoting time, funds, and resources, which are limited, on patient populations that want to have a measure of hope. If the entire reason that we're exploring an antibiotic drug, which otherwise should really have no effect on a virus, if that is all the fact that we would take a population of patients who were sick and apply a test to them involving this medication, if there was zero legitimate grounds for it because the original data that suggested we need to explore this was fabricated, well, then what you're doing is you're giving false hope to patients who are participating in a study on the chance that it might help them or further science to help others. And so we just need to be very careful about accepting these claims and make sure that they're done in a responsible way. Anyway, all right, so let's see, somebody sent me the image. Hold on. Maybe we can find it. I don't see it anywhere. I'll have to check. Maybe it's in my group, because I think they're talking about the cartoon, which I think is a brilliant cartoon, and I'm hoping that we can find it somewhere. Inbox. Again, I mean, if I don't get any other calls, then we're going to go ahead and close soon. So if you want to jump on, it's 210-422-2222. Unfortunately, I am not able to see the cartoon in question. Hold on. There we go. Maybe I am. Hold on. All right, open image, new tab. All right, we do have it. Okay, so let's go ahead and bring that up here. Yeah, this is it. This is that cartoon where, we gotta bring it right over here. We've got people, the virus coming from one side of the screen, and then you have members of all different types of religious faiths asking the scientist doctor to hurry up. Okay. So, thanks for taking the time to join us. I think that we've probably handled everything that we can do for now, and we will see you next time on Talk on Things and Stuff. If you've got an idea for a future topic for us to cover, then by all means, send me a message on the Thoughts on Things and Stuff webpage or by direct message. Until next time, take care.